The tornado hit Sterling Ranch on a Tuesday, but this wasn't just a storm. This was a reckoning. Anna Kowalski stood in the skeletal remains of the main barn. Her voice, usually quiet and thick with a Polish accent, now rang out like a general's. She was shouting orders, pointing, directing the ranch hands who were scrambling through the splinters and the mud. Blood soaked the front of Jake Sterling's shirt. A beam, thick as a man's waist, had crushed his shoulder, but he wasn't looking at the wound. He was looking at her. 4 months ago, she was the hired help, a ghost who moved through his house, scared of her own shadow. Now she commanded his men with a fire in her eyes he'd never seen before. Her hair was a wild mess, her dress was torn and filthy, and in the dying light of the storm, she was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. She was also about to leave him. Forever. "You need doctor," she said, her voice suddenly soft as she knelt beside him. Her fingers, trembling just slightly, pressed a scrap of cloth against his bleeding shoulder. He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't leave me, Anna." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "The town, they talk. They say I am beneath you." "Let them talk," he rasped, the words raw with pain and something else, something deeper. "You're the strongest woman in Wyoming." But a terrible question hung in the air between them, more destructive than the tornado had ever been. Was he too late? Had the town's poison, the weight of their judgment, already destroyed the fragile, beautiful thing they had built? If you've ever wondered what it looks like when two people have to fight the whole world just to be together, you need to hear this story. Drop a like if you believe love is worth fighting for, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from today. Spring had come late to the Powder River Valley in 1889. It was a cold, bitter season that mirrored the heart of Jake Sterling. From his kitchen window, he'd watch the new girl, Anna Kowalski, a name he could barely get his tongue around. She moved like she was constantly apologizing for the space she took up in the world, her shoulders hunched, her eyes always downcast. His wife, Martha, had been gone 4 years. 4 years of a quiet, empty house, of conversations with his horse because there was no one else. He had built an 8,000-acre empire with his bare hands, but he'd forgotten what it was to hold something soft. Anna's English was broken, stitched together with fear. But she cooked like she was composing a symphony and cleaned like she was trying to erase her own existence. For 3 weeks, Jake barely saw her. She was just a blur in the corner of his eye, until the night of the thunderstorm. Lightning tore the sky in half, and the thunder shook the house to its foundations. Jake couldn't sleep. He went downstairs for a glass of whiskey and found her in the kitchen. Flour dusted her hair like a strange halo, and tears tracked clean paths down her dirty cheeks. She was baking, of all things, in the middle of a midnight thunderstorm. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She jumped, nearly dropping the rolling pin. "Sorry, Mr. Sterling. I make bread for morning." She searched for the right words, her hands twisting in her apron. "The storm, it reminds me of the fire in Chicago when I lose my family." Jake was 52 years old, and he had never known that grief could sound so beautiful, even in a broken accent. He leaned against the doorframe, the whiskey forgotten. "My wife," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "She used to bake when she couldn't sleep." Anna's hands went still on the dough. "She make good bread?" A ghost of a smile touched Jake's lips. "Terrible bread, but she tried." In the flickering lamplight of that kitchen, with the storm raging outside, something shifted. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something quieter, a shared understanding. They were two people haunted by ghosts, standing together in the dark. The next morning, a fresh apple pie sat on his table. It didn't taste like apples and cinnamon. It tasted like hope. That spring melted into a hot, dusty summer, and Jake started asking Anna to eat dinner with him. Not in the kitchen, where the help ate, but at the big dining table with him. At first, she was terrified. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, answering his questions in short, careful sentences. "Tell me about Poland," he'd say. "Beautiful country," she'd whisper back. "Green like here, but not so big sky. You miss it?" Her smile was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. "I miss family, but Wyoming," she would gesture to the window, to the vast expanse of his land rolling toward the mountains. Wyoming feels like maybe I can be more than I was. Jake understood that feeling down to his bones. The West was built on the idea of becoming someone new. One evening, as she poured his coffee, their fingers brushed. A jolt went through him, hot and fast. She pulled her hand back, but not before he saw the flicker of something in her eyes. The same thing he felt in his own chest. It was a spark in a field of dry grass, and the whole valley was about to go up in flames. The fever hit him in July. It came on fast, leaving him shivering and delirious. He tried to fight it, but by nightfall he couldn't even stand. Anna found him collapsed on the floor of his study. She didn't panic. She simply put one of his powerful arms over her small shoulders and half dragged, half carried him to his bed. For 3 days, she was his shadow. She brought him broth, spooning it into his mouth like he was a child. She read to him from old newspapers, her accent turning the dry news from Sheridan into a kind of poetry. She placed cool, damp cloths on his burning forehead. On the third night, lost in the fog of the fever, Jake grabbed her hand as she turned to leave his room. "Don't go," he mumbled, his voice thick. "I stay," she whispered, her thumb stroking the back of his hand. "I stay until you are well." He struggled to focus on her face in the dim lamplight. "Not just until I'm well." His voice was suddenly clear, cutting through the delirium. "Anna, I need you to stay, always." She pressed her free palm to his cheek, and her touch was cooler, more soothing than any cloth. Jake. Just his name. But the way she said it, the way it sounded in her accent, it was a prayer. It was a promise. It was everything. When the fever broke the next morning, the world had changed. Jake Sterling was a cattle baron, one of the most powerful men in the Wyoming Territory, and Anna Kowalski was his housekeeper. In their world, there were lines you just didn't cross. They were about to find out what happened when you burned those lines to the ground. It was Mrs. Crawford, the banker's wife, who noticed first. She had eyes like a hawk and a tongue like a razor. "That Polish girl is wearing silk now," she announced to her husband over breakfast one morning. It wasn't just the dress. It was the way Anna carried herself. The slump was gone from her shoulders. She walked like a woman who knew she was cherished. "Jake Sterling is making a fool of himself," Mrs. Crawford declared. "A complete and utter fool." That little seed of gossip took root and spread through Sheridan like a weed. When Anna went to the general store, conversations would halt in mid-sentence. Women would turn their backs, whispering behind their gloved hands. Men would stare, their eyes filled with a crude mix of curiosity and contempt. Jake didn't give a damn about the whispers, but he saw the way they hurt Anna, the way they made her retreat back into herself. "We could keep this quiet," he told her one evening. They were sitting on his porch, watching the sun bleed purple and orange across the mountains. Anna turned to him, her expression unreadable in the twilight. "You are ashamed of me?" "Never," he said, his voice rough. "But this town has its rules. Rules about who can love who." He reached for her hand. It felt small and fragile in his. "In Poland," she said softly, "my father was blacksmith. Poor, but he loved my mother. She was baker's daughter. People said she was too good for him." Her fingers tightened around his. "They had long, happy marriage." "This isn't Poland, Anna." "No." A spark of defiance lit her eyes, the same fire he'd seen during the storm. "This is Wyoming, land of the free." Her words settled something in his soul. He was done hiding. He was done caring what other people thought. He was Jake Sterling, and he would love whomever he pleased. He decided to make a statement, and the annual barn dance in August was the perfect place to do it. The barn was packed, fiddles scraped, boots stomped, and the air was thick with the smell of hay, sweat, and cheap perfume. Jake hadn't set foot in a social gathering since Martha's funeral. When he walked through the door with Anna on his arm, the music didn't just falter, it died. Every single eye in that barn swiveled to stare at them. Anna wore a dress the color of an emerald, a dress he'd bought for her in Cheyenne. He wore his best suit. They stood there in the sudden, deafening silence. A king and his foreign queen, invading the court of petty gossips. Jake felt Anna's hand tremble on his arm, but she held her chin high. He gave the room a slow, deliberate look. meeting every stare. "Evening, folks," he said, his voice calm and steady, carrying easily across the silent room. "Beautiful night for a dance." Someone nervously signaled the fiddlers, and the music started up again, hesitant at first, then regaining its rhythm. But the damage was done. The line had been drawn. Throughout the night, Jake watched as men, emboldened by whiskey, approached Anna. Some were polite, others were not. Tom Brennan, a rancher whose land bordered Jake's and who had always been a rival, was the worst. During a waltz, he held Anna far too close, his hand slipping too low on her back, a smirk on his face. "Careful there, Tom." Jake's voice cut through the music like a whip. Brennan's smirk widened into a nasty grin. "Just being friendly to your housekeeper." The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. It was a challenge, an insult. Anna's cheeks flushed a deep red, and she pulled away from Brennan as if she'd been burned. I I think I need some air," she murmured, and practically fled from the barn. Jake followed her. He found her by the horse corral, her knuckles white as she gripped the top rail, her back to him. "They are right," she said, her voice choked. "I am housekeeper. You are cattle baron. We are from different worlds." He came to stand behind her, so close he could feel the heat radiating from her body, so close he could smell the lavender soap she used. "Look at me, Anna." Slowly she turned. In the moonlight, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're not my housekeeper anymore," he said, his voice low and intense. He reached up and cupped her face in his rough hands. "You're the woman I'm falling in love with." A small gasp escaped her lips. "Jake." "I don't care what they think," he said, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "I only care what you think." She searched his face, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "I think," she whispered, "I think you are the best man I have ever known." And that was all he needed to hear. He lowered his head and kissed her. The world, the whispers, the judging eyes, it all fell away. There was only the taste of her, the softness of her skin, the way she sighed his name against his mouth as if it were a prayer. It was a kiss that sealed their fate. But some worlds don't fall away so easily. Some worlds push back, hard. The consequences arrived the next morning, just after sunrise. A posse of them. Not with guns, but with something far more dangerous. Self-righteousness. Mayor Peterson, Banker Crawford, Judge Morrison, and three other men who considered themselves the pillars of Sheridan society. They sat on their horses in his front yard like a tribunal, their faces grim. "Jake," the mayor called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "We need to have a word." From the kitchen window, Anna watched, her heart pounding. Jake stepped out onto the porch, a coffee cup in his hand, his posture deceptively casual. "Talk about what, gentlemen?" "About maintaining the proper standards in our community," Judge Morrison said stiffly. "Wyoming is on the verge of statehood. We must present a respectable image to the nation." Jake took a slow sip of his coffee. "And you think I'm not respectable?" Banker Crawford, a man whose face always looked pinched and sour, leaned forward in his saddle. "We think you're making a catastrophic mistake, Jake. One that will damage your standing, and ours by association." His eyes flickered toward the house, toward the window where he knew Anna was watching. Jake's voice dropped, losing all its warmth. It became deadly quiet. "Are you men telling me who I can and cannot have in my home, on my own land?" "We're advising you to be sensible," the mayor said smoothly. "This attachment is inappropriate. The girl is beneath your station. End it." Through the window, Anna saw Jake's hand, the one not holding the coffee cup, clench into a white-knuckled fist. When he spoke, his voice wasn't quiet anymore. It cracked across the yard like a rifle shot. "Gentlemen, you have 10 seconds to get off my property before I forget that you were once my friends." They stared at him, shocked by the raw fury in his voice. Then, without another word, they wheeled their horses around and rode away, their backs rigid with indignation. They had delivered their ultimatum. Choose your reputation or choose the girl. And Jake had just given them his answer. But the war had just begun. That night, Anna found him in his study. He was staring into a glass of whiskey as if it held the answers to the universe. "I heard them," she said from the doorway. He looked up, his eyes weary. Anna, I quit, she said, the words falling like stones into the silence. The whiskey glass nearly slipped from his hand. What? I quit job, she repeated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. But her eyes told a different story. They were swimming in pain. I leave tomorrow. You find proper wife. You make proper family. He was on his feet in an instant, the chair crashing to the floor behind him. Like hell you are. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and gripped her by the shoulders. Like hell. Jake, please, she whispered, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her cheeks. You must. You think I give a damn about those men? He demanded, his voice a raw growl. You think I care what this town thinks of me? You should, she cried, her own voice rising. This is your home. These people are your friends. No, he said, his grip gentling, his eyes burning into hers. You are my home now. You. They can all go to hell. She looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her beautiful eyes. You are sure? He didn't answer with words. He pulled her to him and kissed her, a kiss that was hard and desperate and full of 4 years of loneliness, and a future he refused to let them take away. She melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body molding to his. All the tension, all the fear, all the anger of the day poured out of them, replaced by a desperate, aching need. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her toward his bedroom. Her legs wrapped around his waist and he kicked the door shut behind them. In the soft glow of the lamp, her skin was golden. She was beautiful. She was his. His hands trembled as he worked the laces of her dress. Anna's breath came in soft, shaky gasps as the fabric pooled at her feet. He traced the line of her collarbone with his lips, tasting the salt of her tears on her skin. Anna, he whispered against her throat. My Anna. She was reaching for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers fumbling with a desperate urgency, when a sound from outside shattered the moment. It was the crack of splintering wood, the terrified lowing of cattle, and the sound of men shouting. They froze, half undressed, their hearts pounding in their chests for a whole new reason. Fire, Anna whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Jake was already moving, grabbing the rifle he kept propped by the door. Through the bedroom window, the night sky was no longer black. It was flickering with a hungry, hellish orange. Someone hadn't just crossed a line. They had set his world on fire. The message couldn't have been clearer. Some choices come with a price, paid in blood and ash. By dawn, the fire was out, but the air was thick with the stench of charred wood and roasted meat. Jake's prize Hereford bull, an animal worth a small fortune, the cornerstone of his breeding program, was dead, killed by the smoke and the flames. Pinned to the smoldering gate of its pen was a piece of paper. On it, 3 crudely written words. Send the girl away. Anna stood in the ashes, her face a mask of pale shock and crushing guilt. This is my fault, she whispered. No, Jake's voice was as hard as granite. This is because some men are nothing but gutless cowards. He knew who was responsible. Maybe not which man lit the match, but he knew who gave the order. The so-called pillars of the community. But knowing it and proving it were 2 different things. While Jake and his foreman were assessing the damage, Anna made a decision. This had to end. She was the cause of all this pain, this destruction. She had to leave. She packed her few belongings into a small cloth bag. Without a word to anyone, she slipped out of the house and started walking down the long dirt road toward town. She didn't know where she would go, only that she couldn't stay. She couldn't be the reason Jake lost everything he had worked his entire life to build. She made it 3 miles. 3 miles before she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. She just kept walking, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Jake pulled his horse to a stop beside her and dismounted. He didn't say a word. He just stepped in front of her, blocking her path, and pulled her into his arms. She fought him then, her small fists beating against his solid chest. Let me go, she sobbed. I bring you nothing but trouble, nothing but pain. You bring me everything, he said, his voice rough with emotion as he buried his face in her hair. Everything that matters. The fight went out of her, and she collapsed against him, her body shaking with sobs. They burn your barn. They kill your animal. What is next, Jake? What if they hurt you? He held her tighter, as if he could absorb her fear, her pain, into himself. Let them try. He brought her back to the ranch, back to the whispers, back to the glares. He was daring them to make another move. He didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, the sky itself declared war. Anna was hanging laundry when she saw it, a dark, menacing finger twisting down from the clouds. It moved with an unnatural speed, chewing up the prairie, spitting out dirt and grass, and it was heading straight for them. Tornado! She screamed, her voice ripped away by the rising wind. She ran toward the barn where Jake was checking on a sick calf. The ranch hands were already scrambling, trying to get the horses into the relative safety of the stone-walled corral. The wind hit them like a physical blow, a solid wall of sound and fury. The roof of the main barn began to peel away, sheets of tin flying into the air like paper. Beams groaned, creaked, and then snapped with reports like cannon fire. The cellar! Jake yelled, grabbing her arm and pushing her toward the heavy wooden door set in the barn floor. Go! She was halfway there when she heard a sound above them, a terrible tearing, splintering shriek. She looked up. A massive timber, a beam that had supported the hayloft for 50 years, was breaking free. It twisted, hung in the air for a heart-stopping second, and then fell. It wasn't heading for her, it was heading for Jake. He shoved her, hard, sending her stumbling toward the cellar door just as the beam came crashing down. It caught him across the back and shoulders, slamming him face first into the dirt floor. Anna screamed his name, but the roar of the wind swallowed her voice whole. Then the world went black. When the storm passed, a terrifying, unnatural silence fell over the ranch. Anna crawled out of the wreckage, her ears ringing. She found Jake lying unconscious, a pool of dark blood spreading in the dirt beneath his head. For one awful, soul-crushing moment, she thought he was dead. Help! She shrieked, her voice raw. Help me! The ranch hands, dazed and battered, gathered around. They stared down at Jake's still form, their faces grim. They looked lost. Their leader was down. Their world was in ruins. And in that moment of chaos and despair, Anna realized something profound. They weren't looking at the foreman for orders. They were all looking at her. The fear, the grief, it all fell away, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. The timid servant girl was gone. A general had taken her place. Get planks, she commanded, her accent thick but her voice ringing with an authority none of them had ever heard before. From the house, make stretcher, now, quick! Pete, the oldest and most respected of the hands, was the first to move. You heard the lady, he barked at the others. Get to it. As they worked to gently move Jake, Anna's eyes scanned the wreckage. Her gaze fell on something half buried in the mud near where Jake had fallen. A dented, tarnished kerosene lantern. It wasn't one of theirs. She recognized the specific make. It was the same kind of lantern Tom Brennan always carried, the one with the chipped green paint on the base. Her blood ran cold. The fire hadn't been set by some nameless townsperson. It had been Brennan. And this tornado, it had just uncovered the proof. She picked up the lantern and tucked it away, her mind racing. This wasn't just a feud anymore. This was a conspiracy. Jake woke up 3 days later in the doctor's office in Sheridan. The first thing he saw was Anna's face. She was pale with exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, but she was smiling at him through her tears. You are awake, she whispered, her hand finding his. The ranch? He rasped, his head pounding. The ranch is fine, she said, her smile proud and tired. I take care of everything. Cattle are safe. The barn, it will need new roof, but we are all safe. He tried to sit up and groaned, a sharp pain shooting through his skull. How long? 3 days. Doctor says concussion. You must stay in town. 1 week. A week? A week in town, where every eye would be on them, where the whispers would follow them down the street. It was the enemy's territory, and that's when Jake understood. They couldn't win by hiding. They had to fight back, publicly, defiantly. Anna, he said, his voice urgent, I need to ask you something. What, Jake? Marry me. Her breath hitched. You have concussion. You are not thinking clear." He struggled to sit up, ignoring the daggers of pain. "I've never been clearer in my life. They're trying to destroy me by hurting you. They think you're my weakness." He gripped her hand tighter. "I want to show them you're my strength. As my wife, as Mrs. Sterling, you're not just the help anymore. You're the queen of Sterling Ranch. They won't be able to touch you." He looked deep into her eyes. "This isn't just a proposal, Anna. It's a battle plan. Will you be my partner in this war?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of a warrior. She saw the love in his eyes, but she also saw the brilliant, brutal strategy. He wasn't just protecting her. He was anointing her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Yes, I marry you." They were married the very next day, right there in Judge Morrison's office. The same Judge Morrison who had come to his ranch to tell him to get rid of Anna. The irony was so thick you could taste it. Anna wore her emerald green dress. Jake wore his Sunday suit and a white bandage around his head. Mrs. Morrison, her face pinched with disapproval, had to serve as the witness. When the judge mumbled, "You may kiss your wife," Jake pulled Anna into his arms and gave her a kiss that left no doubt in anyone's mind. This was not a marriage of convenience. This was a declaration of love and a declaration of war. The town was stunned into silence, but their enemies were not. Banker Crawford made his move less than a month later. A foreclosure notice arrived at the ranch. It claimed Jake had defaulted on a significant loan, a loan for which he had used his prize Hereford bull as collateral. But the bull was dead. The fire had destroyed the collateral. It was a perfect trap. Crawford was going to take everything. Jake was devastated. He stared at the notice, his signature clearly visible at the bottom of the loan document. He didn't remember signing it, but the last few months had been a blur of stress and exhaustion. Maybe he had. He was on the verge of ruin, but Anna wasn't. She looked at the document, a strange calmness on her face. "This is not your signature," she said simply. "It looks like it," Jake said, defeated. "No," she insisted. "Look at the S. You make your S from the bottom up. This one is from top down." She went to his study and began pulling out old account books, deeds, letters, anything Jake had signed. She laid them out on the dining room table, and there it was, plain as day. The signature on the loan document was a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. "This is not enough," Jake said. "He will say I am lying." "Then we find who did sign it," Anna said, her eyes alight with a cold fire. She stared at the forged signature, a nagging familiarity tickling the back of her mind. She had seen that handwriting before. But where? She thought back, replaying every moment of the past few months. The barn dance, the confrontation, Tom Brennan's nasty smirk. And then she remembered something else. Tucked away with the dented lantern she'd found in the wreckage was a small, singed piece of paper that had been stuck to it. A feed receipt signed by Tom Brennan. She retrieved the receipt and the lantern. She placed the singed receipt next to the foreclosure notice. The signatures were identical. The S was written from the top down. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. It was a conspiracy. Brennan set the fire to destroy the collateral. Crawford, the banker, created the forged loan document. They were working together to steal his ranch. The tornado hadn't caused their problems. It had unearthed the solution. It had delivered the evidence right to her feet. They didn't go to the mayor or the judge. They were part of the rot. Instead, they rode straight to Cheyenne and presented their evidence to the territorial marshal, a man known for his integrity and his dislike of corrupt small-town politics. Anna laid it all out. The lantern, the forged signature on the loan, the matching signature on the feed receipt. It was an airtight case. The marshal's investigation was swift and brutal. Brennan and Crawford were arrested within the week. Faced with the evidence, Brennan confessed everything, implicating not only Crawford but Judge Morrison and Mayor Peterson as well. They were part of a ring, using their power and influence to systematically defraud ranchers, driving them into bankruptcy, and then buying their land for pennies on the dollar. The scandal ripped Sheridan apart. The town's leadership was disgraced, their reputation shattered. They hadn't just been prejudiced, they had been criminals. And the immigrant housekeeper they had scorned and underestimated was the one who brought them all to justice? Spring came early to Wyoming the following year, 1890. Anna Sterling, Mrs. Jake Sterling, stood on the porch of their newly rebuilt ranch house. One hand rested on her swollen belly. She watched her husband working with a string of new horses, his movements easy and confident. Her bakery, Kowalski's, had opened in Sheridan 6 months earlier. At first, the townspeople, shamed and resentful, had stayed away. But the smell of her bread, the perfection of her pies, was a language everyone understood. Now her shop was the heart of the town, a place where people gathered. Even the sour-faced Mrs. Crawford had been forced to admit, grudgingly, that Anna made the finest pastries west of the Mississippi. Jake swung down from his horse and climbed the porch steps, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How's my family doing?" he murmured, his hands spreading across her belly. "We are good," she said, leaning back against his chest. "We are strong." She turned in his arms to face him. "You are never sorry? For all the trouble?" Jake looked out over his land, his thriving ranch, and then back down at the face of the woman who had saved it, and saved him. The people who mattered had stood by them. The people who hadn't, well, they were gone. "The trouble," he said, his voice full of a love that was deeper and stronger than any foundation, "was worth it." He kissed her, a long, slow kiss under the wide Wyoming sky. They had faced down hatred, fire, and the fury of nature itself. They had fought a war and won. They hadn't just built a life together. They had forged an empire, not of land, but of love. And in this wild, beautiful, and unforgiving country, they had finally, truly found their home. Stories like this remind us that the strongest love is often forged in the hardest fires, and that true courage means standing together when the world tries to tear you apart. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe for more tales of love conquering all. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to hear from you.